Welcome everybody to For Life Live. It is Tuesday, February 1st of 2022. I'm Pastor Jeff Duncan with Lutherans for Life. I'm the Director of Volunteers, and I am your host. Remind you that we do have links for an archive of our For Life Live presentations. I'll put that in the chat after we get started. We also want to encourage you to go to our Lutherans for Life webpage and look at the calendar of events for future For Life Lives. I also want to say, have you downloaded the Lutherans for Life app yet? If so, thank you. And by now you are enjoying the full slate of For Life programming that is available from that app at your fingertips anywhere your phone can go or your mobile device. If not, I want to say, why not? It's so simple. All you have to do is go to the platform of the App Store, whether it's an Apple App Store or the Google Play platform. Search for Lutherans for Life. You'll see our symbol, the L and the dove in the light blue and white. Hit the Get button, and then watch the wonders of bits, bytes, and broadcast internet tech savvy as you hold on to that mobile device, your phone, hold it up in the air, and suddenly you'll have the app loaded to it like magic. Wow. When it's done, open the app and start browsing the loads of fun information and powerful resources that we at Lutherans for Life are equipping you in your efforts to be gospel-motivated voices for life in your church and in your community. And then I would like you to show that app to everybody in your church so that they too can download it. Bring it into your Bible class and get all your class to do it. Bring it to the confirmands and get them to download the app. It's something good for them for a change. And if you have any trouble getting them to download, tell them it's a game, and then watch them as they try to figure it out, only to find out that they learned something along the way. Get it to your leadership boards and your pastoral staff so that they can also download the app, and then send them a weekly email to watch a certain part of the app's media programs together. And then you can discuss potential uses in your own congregation from that viewing. And while you're on the app, you can also go to the Give button and renew your partnership with LFL, either a one-time gift or do a regular planned giving on a regular basis. We continue to equip Lutherans all across the globe and their neighbors to be gospel-motivated voices for life because of your generosity and support and becoming partners with us in this work. And so we thank you for that, and we ask you to pray for us and hold us up together in this. Our next session will be February 15th, the third Tuesday of this month. At that time, we'll welcome Loretta Kelly from St. John Lutheran Church in Roanoke, Virginia. She's going to present an idea that they have implemented at their church, and they're receiving wonderful accolades over. It's called a Remembrance Garden for the Unborn. This is what Loretta says. The Remembrance Garden for the Unborn is designed to give women and men an opportunity to grieve the loss of a child, whether it be from a choice or circumstance, and to find peace knowing the unsurpassed love the Lord has for them and their unborn baby. So I hope you'll join us on February 15th and see if your church might be interested in using their design or information to offer a similar gospel-motivated voice for life in your community. Again, I'll put a registration link for this next session up in the chat section in just a little bit. Let me begin by having a short devotion. A separation of church and state? Maybe. But does the Bible have anything to say that we should listen and learn about government? Well, let me share three scriptural thoughts. From Psalm 94:20, can wicked rulers be allied with you? Those who frame injustice by statute. It's a good question, don't you think? If your rulers are wicked and unjust, Shouldn't you point that out? And you can also pray for them, be of support in educating them, and by all means, call them to repentance. However, until they do repent and show by words and deeds that they are no longer ruling by unjust statutes, at least be wary of them and their wicked motives and designs upon yours and your neighbor's life. Consider another piece of scripture. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. Proverbs 29:2. For nearly 50 years in this country, we, For Life citizens, have been groaning and moaning over the wicked ruling of Roe versus Wade. And even as the righteous have increased in number and voice to oppose this evil law of the land, 62 million babies and their families continue to groan in despair over their demise. And it would appear this proverb provides good news through numbers. The righteous must increase, and increase even more. And of course, the best good news is how that happens, by faith in the works of Jesus Christ upon the cross to remove our guilt and sins and to give to us his righteousness. That's the opportunity that Life Teams and Life Chapters have across this great land to mobilize the message that God chose you in Christ and appointed you to bear fruit, good works towards your neighbor. So let the righteous increase through the gospel of Jesus Christ unto eternal life. And finally, I'm going to share from 2 Timothy chapter 3. But understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Avoid such people. We all know and realize that the world is dying. These words, in so many descriptions, warn us of what we can expect to experience and witness all around us. And worst of all, it seems we don't have the ability or choice at times to avoid such people or their circumstances. And so it can become rather disheartening and discouraging, can't it? But we can respond with love in Christ, as well as good, solid, righteous, and biblically based thoughts and words to educate and call our neighbors to live and think differently. So I want you to keep that in mind as tonight our speaker, Carol Tobias, shares with us much of what you can do as Lutheran Christians, even in the midst of this horrible political environment. So let us pray. Eternal Lord, ruler of all, graciously regard those who have been set in positions of authority among us, that, guided by your Spirit, they may be high in purpose, wise in counsel, firm in good resolution, and unwavering in duty, that under them we may be governed quietly and peaceably through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Well, tonight we have the distinct pleasure of having with us for the second time, Carol Tobias. She is the president of the National Right to Life Committee. It is the nation's largest and oldest pro-life organization. She hails from North Dakota. She served on the National Right to Life Board of Directors since 1987. And from 83 to 91, she was the executive director of the North Dakota Right to Life, and in 91 hired then as the National Right to Life political director, a position she held until 2005. During her tenure as the political director, pro-life majorities were elected to both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. In both 2000 and 2004, she oversaw the efforts of National Right to Life's Political Action Committee on behalf of George W. Bush. She has testified before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee 2014 in opposition to the Women's Health Protection Act, which is more appropriately called the Abortion Until Birth Without Limits Act. She's been on numerous television appearances, ABC's World News Tonight, NBC's Today Show, CNN, the NewsHour on PBS, C-SPAN, and Fox News Channel, as well as other numerous television and radio programs throughout the country. Quotes have been found from her in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and USA Today. Tonight, Carol hopes that this presentation will help you know your rights as citizens, know your rights as a pro-life organization, and speak to public policy issues appropriately and effectively. It's my pleasure. Oh, before I turn it over to her completely, I am putting a Dropbox link to the documents that Carol will discuss tonight. I will put that again in the chat section momentarily, and you can pull up any of those documents and look at them on your computer or have them for the future. So it's my pleasure to introduce Carol Tobias and have her with us again on For Life Live. Carol, welcome.
Thank you so much, Pastor Duncan. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Now, can everybody hear me? Am I coming through well enough?
I'm hearing you.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank you.
we can hear you.
Thank you. Good. Okay. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I hope that I'm able to share something that you don't already know. That's certainly my goal tonight, to share some ways that we can make a difference, to encourage people to get involved and to be more motivated and energized to help us protect life. And we've got a lot of people who agree with us. A lot of them are sitting in our churches, but they either maybe aren't interested, but more so just don't know what to do. So I'm hoping I can just give you a few ideas to get them involved in little ways, even if that's all they want, but just something that they can help us in this mission. Now, I know a couple of months ago you had Colonel Eidsmoe, and I think he was probably talking about citizens of two kingdoms, and we're all very familiar with that. But I so often reflect of how blessed we are to live in a country that allows us to participate in our governmental process. I often think if you're in countries that are dictators, fascists, true fascists, what do you do if you're not allowed to really get involved? Well, that's not our problem. We have the privilege of being able to get involved, but I think we also have the responsibility. I want to start by reading something that I had come across recently, actually written like 20 years ago, by Dr. Gene Veith, former, and I apologize, I don't know if it's Veith or Veith, but a former professor at Concordia, Wisconsin. And he had written this shortly after the 2001 attack on the World Trade Centers. And he was talking about, people are wondering, are we too patriotic? Are we somehow getting pulled away from, our faith and putting more emphasis on our country? So he was just kind of writing about that whole topic. But this is how he kind of ended his article. The Augsburg Confession, Article 16, is clear that Christians owe obedience to their magistrates and laws, except when commanded to sin, for then they owe greater obedience to God than to human beings. The confessors cite Acts 5:29, when the disciples were forbidden by law to preach the gospel. We must obey God rather than man. But there is a special twist for Americans and others who live in a democratic republic. We elect our own governing officials. Ultimately, we rule them. Christians should indeed obey the laws, pay their taxes, and honor and pray for their governing officials. Feelings of patriotism and acts of civic mindedness are fitting responses to the blessings God has given this country and to the citizenship he has called us to. But the calling to citizenship also includes such things as voting, debating issues, grassroots politics, and civic activism. Christians who mobilize for pro-life causes, even when this means criticizing officials and working to change laws, are acting in their vocation as citizens. Christians are called to be engaged, not just in government, but in their cultures as a whole, working through their various vocations to make their country, if only in a small way, a better place. Christians may indeed wave the flag and not only sing, but pray, God bless America. So I want to, I guess, reinforce that or just maybe make that, I can make that available if anyone's wondering how or where to look for it. It's called the citizenship. But we do have the privilege of living in a country that lets us get involved in our political process, in our legislative process, but that's also a responsibility. I am hoping to give you, as I said earlier, some suggestions and ideas as to how you can participate and how you can get others to help through your chapters or as individuals. Now, the first document that I have, and Pastor Duncan, if you could put that up, is the document from Jim Bopp. He is General Counsel for National Right to Life and has been there for many years. Oh, just a minute. Got to go back to my other page, my notes. Okay, yeah, Jim has been our general counsel for many years and has kept us out of trouble throughout the years. So I just really appreciate him putting together this summary of what we can do in our organizations to influence politics, legislation, whatever. And
Are we
I'm
all
not going
seeing
to.
this? I just want to make sure it's up. Is it all up there?
Can see it.
It is.
We
Okay.
can see it. Very good. Thank you.
All right. Good.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Kat.
And,
Go right ahead.
oh, that's fine. That's fine. And I am not going to read through all of it, but I do want to go through some portions in depth. And also just, you've got this now for your own purposes. You can download it and keep it handy. And he does have a disclaimer in there that, if you have questions, find a lawyer, talk to them and make sure that you're maybe doing things right. But this is a very thorough guide that has been used by our state affiliates and chapters around the country for many years. And he does update it if there is anything new that has happened. So right at the very top, he says, as not-for-profit organizations move increasingly into political activities, the need for clear guidelines on the permissible activities of the various forms of nonprofit organizations also increases. These guidelines summarize the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code, the Federal Election Campaign Act, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, and various U.S. Supreme Court decisions on the First Amendment protections for political speech. So he has gone through IRS, federal election, court cases, and tried to make this as succinct and accurate as possible so that you can apply these guidelines when you're trying to figure out what to do. Now, if you go down to the top of page 2, it says religious, educational, and charitable organizations are exempt under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. An educational organization or fund is exempt from paying federal income taxes, and donations to it are tax deductible on both state and federal tax returns, and may expend funds for educational purposes and an insubstantial amount on lobbying and to promote legislation. Now, 501c3 is going to be restricted much more than a 501c4. Like National Right to Life, overall umbrella is a 501c4. We can do lobbying, we can do education, it's our membership organization. We can do a lot of different activities to try to bring together, like-minded people around the country. We do not have to pay taxes through that C4, but donations to the C4 are also not tax deductible. We have an internal educational C3, which is what I believe Lutherans for Life is as well. And the restrictions on what you can do when it comes to political action and legislative activities is more limited. So throughout this document, and then later on we'll go through, there's a bit of a chart that says if you're a 501c4, you can or cannot do these. If you're a C3, you can or cannot do these. And if you're a PAC or a political action committee, you can or cannot do these. And I would just encourage you right up front, and I did mention this to Pastor Duncan, that I was certainly not going to encourage you to do anything that would put your 501c3 status in danger. But there are some things that you are allowed to do in the legislative and political arenas. And I'm hoping that this chart and this information will be helpful as you try to figure out some things that you could be doing in your churches and in your communities. And I will tell you, the C3 is more tightly regulated and more tightly watched. And I think a lot of it has to do with many people in Washington, and I would say in both parties, certainly the administration, the bureaucracy types, since people who donate to your C3 do not have to pay taxes on that money, there are many in Washington who think 501c3s are taking money, or at least preventing money that rightfully should belong to the federal government, because people are not paying taxes on it. So I strongly encourage you, if it's something that a C3 shouldn't do, don't do it, because the IRS can revoke a C3 and they, they're hard to get back, or they're hard to actually get. So I'm putting all that warning up front. Be very careful on what you do, how you do it. Stay within the guidelines of a 501c3 so that the IRS doesn't come after you. But that last statement that I read, may expend funds for educational purposes and an insubstantial amount on lobbying and to promote legislation. Now, let's see, I'm going to go down, let's see, to page 3. If you've got that, there's a category, it's called political activities. And I'm just going to go through part of that. Activities which can influence the election of a political candidate are quite broad and range from contributions to a candidate to activities such as publishing the voting record of incumbents who are running for re-election. Only some of these activities are considered active electioneering, which must be done by a 527. That's another category altogether. Some of these activities, however, may be done by a C4 or C3 organization. It depends on the type of activity and how the activity is conducted. Let's see, the next paragraph, it says active electioneering involves election actions such as endorsement of candidates, expenditures to expressly advocate the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate. Active electioneering is 3 different types. You could make a direct contribution of money. You could do an in-kind contribution, which is some kind of service or some other thing that is provided, or independent expenditures, which means you're out there telling people what to do and who to vote for, but the candidate doesn't know about it. And those are a little easier to work with. They're not quite as many limits. But that is what you should not do with your C3. And I'm going to get into that. You cannot tell people how to vote, who to vote for a candidate. You certainly cannot make contributions to the candidate. Those are for other organization types. Now, what you can do is issue-oriented speech. That can influence elections, but it's not nearly as limited as if you are talking about specific candidates. And issue advocacy is what we do when we're trying to promote life and to, encourage people to vote for pro-life candidates, or, to get involved in the abortion debate. Now on, let's see, page 4. I'm going to start with just the second paragraph. Issue-oriented speech can also influence elections. Issue advocacy may not be limited by government and can be freely engaged in by both C3 and C4 groups, as well as PACs. Issue advocacy includes the discussion of issues of public concern, the actions of government officials in office, and the positions of candidates on issues, including criticizing and praising a candidate's position. As long as one does not use explicit words expressly advocating the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate, one is free to praise or criticize officials and candidates. This is called issue advocacy. An exception to the rule is doing anything that they would call electioneering communications, defined as broadcast, cable, or satellite communications, where you refer to a clearly identified federal candidate. So you would specifically name a candidate. And these distributions are publicly distributed within 30 days of a primary election or within 60 days of a general election, and targeted to the relevant electorate. So again, it's just kind of a caution there. You don't get on a radio spot and talk about specific candidates, because then they think that you're advocating for them if it's within, like I said, 30 days of a primary election, 60 days of a general. So I'm going to go over this, hopefully I'm not getting into the weeds. I want to just kind of cover it briefly so you know what is actually in this document, and you can look at it later and keep it on hand and use it if some kind of questions come up. Now at the top of page 5, it says an electioneering communication does not include a communication appearing in a newspaper or magazine ad, handbills, brochures, appearing in a news story, something with a candidate forum. I mean, it's got more information in there as to what is not electioneering and what you can do. But to, I think, make it easier to understand and be very clear, I'm going to ask Pastor Duncan, if you would go to the chart on page 9. Now, if you can see there, it says type of organizations, and then it's on the left, it's got activities, and then whether or not they are exempt under a 501c3, C4, or PAC. So as you are a C3, you can go down that column, and if it says yes, that means you can do it. If it says no, that means don't do it, because C3 does not have, is limited and cannot do that. So you can discuss positions of political candidates on issues. A C3 cannot endorse candidates. They cannot contribute to candidates. They cannot do independent expenditures. They cannot do fundraising projects. They cannot contribute to other PACs that are helping candidates. Electioneering, number 8, electioneering communications regarding federal candidates. You can do those activities, but under the previous limitation, not broadcast on radio or TV, but you can do some communications talking about the candidates. You can get involved in some state referendums, but you cannot pay for candidates or for people to go to state or national political conventions. Can't pay for anything connected to a PAC. You can have a candidate appear at a meeting. Maybe you want to set up something and invite a few, church people, few churches to come together. Ask candidates if they will come. Now, you can certainly do this if it is, say, your local state representative, and he or she has introduced legislation into the state legislature, and you can ask them to come and just tell the people what the bill is about, why he or she thinks it would be a good bill to pass. Or maybe there's something that's, in the legislature and the state rep wants to come and talk to the people and tell everybody why it's a bad bill. That is certainly allowed. That's, he or she may be a candidate on the ballot, but as long as that doesn't come up during the discussion, a candidate or a sitting elected official can certainly go to a public group and talk about what is happening with issues, with legislation. And you don't stand up at the end of the meeting and say, hey, what a great guy, make sure you vote for him in November. Just remember that there are lines, but there's nothing wrong with having someone come and talk about what is happening in the community. This also would include where you could have various candidates come for some kind of candidate forum where they are asked questions and people get a chance to meet them. And I'll go into, there are some guidelines on that. But you could do surveys to find out where the candidates stand on various issues. You can certainly publicize their voting records, as long as it's straightforward. This was the vote, this is what the vote meant, and this is how this person voted. And I apologize, I do not know why page 10 is blank, but that is, nothing has been eliminated. It's just something, there's a page there got missed in there, and not got missed, but got added. Okay, continuing, nonpartisan voter education. You can do that. Voter registration, yes, you can do that. Make sure that everybody in your church is registered to vote. It's still kind of amazing how many people just don't really care or don't know how, or they moved, or maybe got married and changed their name. There are different reasons why someone might not be eligible to vote. So you can certainly encourage people to register to vote. Give them information as to how they do it, maybe find a website or go to the state secretary of state. So you can certainly do that. Voter identification activities, you can identify people that are pro-life. I know that there are people who go, door to door and say, hey, are you registered to vote? No, I'm not. Well, would you like to? In fact, I know one group, and I'm not going to say who it was, but they had, I guess, a project that they wanted to get more pro-life people registered to vote. So they would say, knock on doors and say, we are, it was one of our state affiliates, actually, so, a couple of their chapters, going door to door and just knocking on the door. And when someone would answer, they would say, I'm just curious, kind of doing a survey. I've got a couple of questions, and are you pro-life? Are you against abortion? They had just a couple of questions. And if someone said, no, I think abortion should be legal, they would say, okay, thank you very much. And they would move on. If they got to a house where someone said, yeah, I'm pro-life, I really think abortion is wrong, then they would say, are you registered to vote? What would you like to register? We can help you do that. So it was just kind of, they were finding the pro-life people and getting them registered. I don't think there was anything illegal with that, but because there's nothing that says you have to register everybody you talk to. But anyway, that was one thing that they did to just get more pro-life people registered to vote. And then, of course, you have to make sure they know where the candidates stand on issues. And yes, C3s, I'm going number 6, can lobby for legislation. Now, distribution of political candidate literature, no. Voter guides, C4 voter guides, no. C3 voter guides, yes. There is a slight distinction. You actually, if you have a mailing list or a list of people, you could rent it to a candidate at fair market value. That's something you'd have to find out what that is. You can't give it to them at a cheaper rate. Newsletter publication. If you have a newspaper, I don't know how many of you really would, but you could do political ads at fair market value if you allow businesses to do, this might actually be like a church bulletin. Some churches will have local businesses put in little ads just to help pay for it, throughout the week. If you accept the dry cleaner or the local bakery from putting an ad in the back of your church bulletin, then you could accept the political ad as well. But you can't give them a cut rate. It's just, you got to treat the candidates as you would anybody else. You can do news stories, but you shouldn't do editorials, because generally editorials, at least not as an organization, tend to be more of trying to push a particular point of view or a particular candidate. So, okay, I'm gonna, let's see, Pastor Duncan, if we can jump to page 17. Okay, item number 12. This is appearance of political candidate at meeting. Oh, and we just went through the chart of yes, you can, no, you can't. These next few pages are in-depth descriptions or more information about that chart. So if there was something on that chart that you were wondering, what is that? You can look for that number on, or that information on this in the following subsequent pages. So for number 12, it was appearance of political candidate at meeting. This is getting into some of what I was talking about. Invite all the candidates, make sure that the questions are, fairly presented. Topics should be, cover a broad range of issues of interest to the public. Each candidate gets a chance to present his or her views. The moderator should not comment on the questions or make comments that imply approval or disapproval of the candidates. So as I said, they can't say, hey, great answer, John, good job. or, tell someone, I'm not sure I agree with you on that. I mean, just, it has to be voter education so that the people get a chance to hear from the candidates. Let's see, you're going to go down next page 18. Down toward the bottom, it says voter guides. Organizations exempt under a 501c3 and C4 may publish the results of surveys of candidates on public issues. Voter guides should not include an endorsement of a candidate or expressly advocate the election or defeat of any candidate. And it says for 501c3 group, surveys should conform to the following guidelines. Questionnaires should be sent to all candidates. All responses should be published. The questions should cover a wide variety of issues. The questions should not indicate a bias toward the organization's preferred answer. I mean, this is where if you've got 3 candidates that respond and there's 2 yeses and 1 no, you don't put beside it, our organization thinks no, says no is the correct answer. All you're doing is providing information about where the candidates stand. The responses should be published in the candidate's own words or in a neutral, unbiased, and complete summary. The survey should not be published under the direction or control or, direct or indirect of any candidate. Down to item 14, voting records. It's pretty much the same. You've got to treat the candidates fairly. You can tell people how the candidates voted on particular issues and particular pieces of legislation. That's something that every voter should have the right to know, and you can provide that information to them. Going to the next page, item 15, voter education. 501c3 and C4 groups may participate in nonpartisan voter education. Voter education involves discussion of the electoral process, such as how to run for public office or a delegate, how to register, where to vote, helping or assisting people to register, and get out the vote drives. These are not, this is something that a C3 can do. It's making people aware of how to vote, how to register, where to vote. And the C3 can certainly do those. Down at the bottom of page 20, lobbying for legislation. You certainly can do that. 501c3s that have not made a 501h election, and that's a different category altogether, so I guess we don't really need to worry about that. I mean, if you spend a large amount of your money on it, you can actually apply for a different status. But earlier I'd said that a C3 can lobby if you do an insubstantial amount of your budget. So this says that is generally considered to be 5 to 15% of the C3's total expenditures. And then it gets into what you can and can't do. It's much more detailed than that. But I would basically just kind of keep track. If you would decide you're going to do a bulletin insert in your church bulletin and asking people to vote or to lobby their elected officials on a particular piece of legislation, it maybe wouldn't hurt to just kind of keep track of, I went to UPS, I made 100 copies and it cost $15. Or maybe your church copier is willing to let you make copies on their copier. Again, it wouldn't hurt if you could figure out, if you figure the paper, the toner, I don't know if there's going to be any rent involved. Maybe you can get the copies at 7 cents or 10 cents a copy. That's what anybody else, I would just kind of keep track of it to show that you are not spending a substantial amount of your budget on money. I mean, I've never heard of a case where the IRS comes in and says, how much money are you spending on your lobbying activities? And then someone has to, it's going to have to be pretty blatant, pretty flagrant that you are, as a C3, lobbying and spending most of your money on that and just trying to take advantage of the tax deductible nature of the organization. If you are doing bulletin inserts on legislation or handing out materials. It's, like I said, it's safe to just have that information available as to how much you actually spent. But I really wouldn't worry about it too much unless you just become a lobbying organization. And I know you're not going to, because there are many other areas of concern that Lutherans for Life chapters are working on. But it, like I said, it wouldn't hurt to just kind of keep a notation of what you spent on lobbying activities or something, that has to be insubstantial. Just kind of I guess, a note.
Carol,
Yes.
would, if somebody travels to their capital and wants to talk to those representatives who are bringing up state issues into their legislatures, and they want to, educate them on, how they think they should be presenting this information, would they have to keep track of mileage, those sort of things? Would that be something that they have to do?
It would be helpful if they did. I mean, if the C3 is going to reimburse them for mileage or meals, then they should keep track of that as well.
Okay.
Quite frankly, most of the pro-life people I know that go to the legislature just because this bill is coming up and I want to be there to make my presence known and to try to talk to some legislators. A lot of them just that's their expense. They're going to buy their meals and pay their gas, and there's no reimbursement coming from any organization. But yes, if that would be considered lobbying as well. So if the president of a Lutherans for Life chapter wants to go lobby at the state legislature and the chapter is willing to pay expenses, then yeah, keep track of it, because that would also be included.
Okay, thank you.
In the insubstantial 5 to 15% amount. I think that's all I have on this document. So maybe we could, I guess I would be willing to just kind of stop a few minutes and see if there are any questions, if anyone wants to ask about this specifically. I mean, you've got the document, you can certainly take it home and read it.
I get the
right.
sense, Carol, that there is a difference between political candidates and the political issues, and that we are, as a 501c3, a lot more free on how we can advocate for an issue than we are to advocate for a particular candidate. Is that right?
Absolutely. Where you get into the problem is if you are advocating the election or defeat of a particular candidate. Those are much tighter rules and much more closely watched than if you are out there talking about abortion, talking about a particular piece of legislation, whether it's federal or state. That's issue advocacy. And the Federal Election Campaign Act doesn't come into it. The IRS is not really going to get into that, to any great extent. But again, just don't turn the chapter into a full-time lobbying organization.
Okay, and I'm going to bring up a specific example. Kansas is going to vote at a Supreme Court amendment or vote on a constitutional amendment called Value Them Both. It's coming up in August of this year. And life teams and life chapters could direct their members and say, this is the proper way to vote. Now, I've seen summaries where, it says a yes vote means this and a no vote means that. But they could indicate correctly that you should vote, in this particular way as a For Life organization or For Life supporter.
Yes. Yes, you can tell people how to vote on a ballot measure. That is issue advocacy, because there will not be a candidate on the ballot. The rules are different. I mean, not on the ballot. That's not what you're voting on. It's not vote for this candidate so that this happens. You're voting on the state constitution. And yes, you can tell people how to vote, or how you would like them to vote.
Good. Roni, you had a question.
Yeah, so frequently we discuss these political issues at our life team meetings. And my question is, are we permitted to summarize? So for example, here in Arizona, The pro-life majority is very slim, but it's pretty much every Republican in the legislature is pro-life, and every Democrat in the state legislature is not pro-life. And so are we allowed to say on this euthanasia bill, every Republican voted against euthanasia, every Democrat voted in favor of it? Or do we have to talk about very specific candidates? Because if we mention parties, does that then become partisan?
Yeah, I mean, I would try not to do that if you can. Just saying Democrats are bad, Republicans are good, maybe doesn't really send the right message. I mean, the FEC isn't going to get involved in that aspect, or the IRS as much, because they're more concerned about whether or not you are helping to elect a particular candidate. But I would be a little more careful about just saying all the Democrats are bad, all the Republicans are good. I would say vote for pro-life candidates, and make sure that people know how the representatives in their area voted. You could say, this is what this bill did, and these are the candidates that supported it. These are the candidates that opposed it. That is just plain education, and that's something you can't do.
I have a question. Carolyn Burns here.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Refresh my memory on this. Can we not hand out, and does not the League of Women Voters have stipulations or show where the candidates stand on these issues? I remember one election we did hand out the League of Women Voters lists. And usually there's a good amount of them in like the library and so forth. And do they not show whether we would talk elsewhere than at the church or something about it, and where these candidates stand? But there you have your candidates that you can get the information from your Right to Life office.
Mm-hmm.
What is legal in doing that in that area?
Well, I certainly could be wrong, but I think the League of Women Voters will have certain questions, and they will put information out about the candidates. I believe that they tend to be more on the liberal end because of different things that they have maybe done. But what they provide to the voters, I think, is information on candidates. Maybe it might be a summary because they did an interview, or they will just put out answers to their questionnaires. I don't think the League of Women Voters tells people who to vote for. So that's certainly something that you can do. Here are the issues, and it's whether you would decide you want to try your own questionnaire or take another questionnaire that another group has done, but make sure that it's, I don't want to say neutral, but if you're looking at it, you can say, oh, this is the pro-life legislation that I supported, and this candidate supported it, so I'm going to vote for him. But someone who is on the other side could say, this is the pro-life bill or the anti-abortion bill that I didn't like, and this candidate voted for it, so I'm going to vote against him. So that someone with different looking and make determination how they're going to vote based on the information that is provided. You should not say, this was the bill in the state house. We supported it. These candidates voted for it, because you are in effect then telling people how you want them to vote, which candidate you want them to vote for. So I would encourage you to just keep it strictly neutral. This is the bill, this is how they voted, or this was the questionnaire, question that was asked, this is how the candidate answered, and let people look at the information and make up their own mind.
Is that not, excuse
Pardon?
me. Okay, is that not only on the church grounds where one can do that? If you were on your walk or on your bike ride or something.
You could pass that out to anybody. I mean, you could make up your own flyer and say, I'm pro-life, and, this is the pro-life candidate. I hope you'll vote for him, but do it as an individual, not as a Lutherans for Life or a C3 organization. You as an individual can certainly
Out
talk
in the
to
world,
as many
in
people
your everyday
as you
world.
want.
Yeah, everyday world, you can do that, even though
Yes.
you are a Lutherans for Life person, and you see someone from church out there on the bike trail or something, you can talk about it there.
Oh, absolutely. As an individual, you
it-
can say anything you want.
Yeah, but away from the church grounds, isn't that it? I mean, you're not on your church property.
Oh, as an individual, you could do it on the church property. I mean, I would not, I mean, if you want to stand on the sidewalk right outside the door, and as people come out, just say, hey, I just want you to know, I'm going to be voting for, Janet Brown for the House of Representatives because she's pro-life. I hope you will do that too. Now church members might or might not, think that's appropriate, but what are they going to do? You have the right to say that.
That's what we're there for. Yep.
Yeah.
You know it. Okay.
Yeah,
thank
but
you.
I would, as a Lutherans for Life chapter, I would not put out anything that says this is the pro-life candidate, vote for the pro-life candidate.
Or go down the
Just-
block from the parking lot and hand things out down the block further.
Yeah, or hand things out from the parking lot as they're driving out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, churches and some churches are very vocal. They don't care what the government says, and I've seen churches that have pastors, and I don't think it's been a Lutheran pastor, but I have seen pastors that will have a candidate right there and say, this is the man who stands for Christian principles, and I'm going to be voting for him, and I hope you will too.
Yes, I've heard that.
Now, if the IRS wanted to go after them, they certainly could. But I think in a Lutheran church, you're going to find the pastors being maybe a little more wary and concerned that they're not going to quite do that. But if you're just handing out information about who the candidates are, where they stand, if they've got a voting record, what that record is, that's just providing information.
Thank you.
Pastor
You're welcome.
Steiner, would you like to ask your question?
Carol, thank you so much for the wonderfully insightful presentation. I have a hypothetical question for you. If I, as the president of our chapter here in Northern Virginia, approached the governor or the attorney general of the state of Virginia and invited them to give a presentation to our chapter or to this gathering, and the presentation would be on church-state relations. Is that within fair territory?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, if it was an election year, I mean, you had a great election last year. But if your elections are going to be this fall, then you would just have to be careful that he doesn't say, by the way, I'm going to be on the ballot this year. I'd appreciate your vote. Or even if he does that, then, you don't stand up and say, you know what, Governor Youngkin is great, so make sure you vote for him. If you're not doing that, if he's just there to talk about that particular issue, church and state relationships, or he could talk about, his pro-life convictions. If he is there just talking issues, he is reaching out and educating his people. You are trying to bring them closer to the elected officials. If the election isn't mentioned or involved at all, you're fine.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay, I think I'm going to go back and finish. I've got a few more things I want to cover. Okay, just really quickly, I'm going to give you a brief update on what's happening on some of the federal legislation. I'm pretty sure you are all aware that the Hyde Amendment, which prevents tax funding of abortion, is in the appropriations bills that have been passed by the U.S. House of Representatives. The Senate, the budget, I mean, the appropriations bills and the budget are supposed to be passed by September 30th of each year. That's October 1st is the beginning of a new fiscal year. The House passed appropriations bills removing all limits, all amendments that would have prevented tax funding of abortion. The Senate, because they couldn't get it passed, with the filibuster 60-person rule is still in effect. The Senate didn't agree to it. So what they did was pass a continuing resolution, which means they are operating on the previous year's budget figures. So we are currently operating under 2021 fiscal year figures, and that means the Hyde Amendment and the other funding limits are still in effect, which is a great thing. That continuing resolution will end on February 18th. So Congress will have to either, get the Senate to pass the appropriations bills, or they can just pass another continuing resolution, and maybe they'll say, we're going to do this, again, we'll just keep operating at the previous year's budget levels, and we're going to do it until, May 1st. And then on May 1st, they can decide if they're going to, change appropriations bills, or they'll say, you know what, let's just let it go to the end of the year, and let's see if we can come up with something for the new fiscal year starting October 1st of 2022. So we are currently our federal government is currently operating under a continuing resolution. Now, the House could cave and decide there are other things in this bill that we want, that we're willing to put the Hyde Amendment and these other limits, funding restrictions back in. And then the Senate might say, okay, as long as that's there, we can pass this budget. And then whenever they pass it, it would be in effect until September 30th. I don't see that happening. Nancy Pelosi is not going to cave. She is not going to put funding restrictions back into the appropriations bills. Pro-life senators in the Senate are standing firm. They are not going to cave. As long as abortions would be paid for, they are not going to pass those appropriations bills. So I think, and I really hope that we just have the continuing resolution go through September 30th of this year. And whether or not they take care of that, on February 18th, they'll say, let's just do it through September 30th. They could do that, which is great, because that means the Hyde Amendment and the Weldon Amendment and the Smith Amendment and the Helms Amendment and all those that are in effect in the various areas of our appropriations bills dealing with whether or not we're going to pay for abortions in military prison, in the military for our soldiers who get pregnant, in federal prisons, in the District of Columbia, conscience protections, that's all in the current budget that the old budget that we are operating under currently. But so that continuing resolution is until February 18th. So in the next couple of weeks, we will know if the Senate is going to, or if Congress as a whole is going to just do another CR. Another bill just to keep an eye on is the Women's Health Protection Act that passed the House. Senator Schumer could put it on the floor at any time, but again, I believe we have the votes in the Senate to make sure it doesn't pass. But that is a bill that would abolish or overturn nearly every pro-life law that is currently in effect in our states and at the federal level. It would, even go so far as to allow abortions in the last 3 months of the pregnancy, if the abortionist would determine that the woman's health, whether it's physical or mental, is going to be affected. So the Women's Health Protection Act is a dangerous bill, and Democrats in Congress, quite frankly, and I'm going to say Democrats because there's, one in the House and one in the Senate that are with us. Otherwise, everyone there is supporting this radical bill. But they would really love to get that passed because they're concerned that the Supreme Court might overturn Roe v. Wade, and the Women's Health Protection Act would just basically reinforce and even expand Roe v. Wade. So that is a top goal for the abortion industry and their allies in Congress. And then quickly, one other bill that is kind of strange. The Equal Rights Amendment in 1972 was passed by Congress. They needed 2/3 in both the House and the Senate. They got it. It was sent to the states with a 7-year deadline asking the states to ratify the amendment to the Constitution. 38 states were needed. By the time the 7-year deadline came around, only 35 states had ratified, and 5 of those actually had come back later in that time period and rescinded, saying, we take back the ratification. So then there's a question of whether it was 35 states or 30. But then in the last couple of years, 3 more states, Illinois, Nevada, and Virginia, ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. Now the deadline is long gone. It was done in 1979, but there is an effort to say that we now have 38 states, that the 7-year deadline is irrelevant, and they're trying to push the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, to just declare that we have 38 states and the Equal Rights Amendment should be recognized as an official amendment in the US Constitution. Now, 26 judges over the past, I don't know, maybe 40 years have rejected efforts to force the government to recognize the ERA. You know, different groups have gone before the judges saying we have 38 states, you know, or the deadline doesn't count. You know, there was a bill several years ago that a constitutional amendment that was actually passed because they had gotten their 38th state, but there was no deadline in that. So even though it had taken like 40, 50 years, enough states passed this amendment and it actually is in effect. And they're trying to do the same thing with the ERA, except too many judges, federal judges, have come back and said the 7-year deadline was an official part of the measure that went to the state legislatures. So you can't just retroactively, you know, say that that 7-year deadline doesn't exist and doesn't matter. So we've had, like I said, 26 judges over the years say that the ERA is dead. And what's even funny is that shortly before she died, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that, you know, great feminist on the Supreme Court, said that they needed to start over with the ERA. She said, if we are going to accept the states who are latecomers, that they passed or they ratified the amendment after that 7-year deadline, then are we also going to recognize that 5 states had rescinded their ratification? She said the waters are too muddy. Let's just start over. But the abortion industry and their allies, the different organizations, whether it's the you know, Center for Reproductive Rights and ERA Now and all these different groups, are pushing, like I said, the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, you know, the Office of Legal Counsel at DOJ has declared that the amendment did not go into effect because they did not have the 38 states within that 7-year deadline. They are pushing to get the DOJ to just declare that there are 38 states and the amendment is official. And that is something I don't think it's going to happen because, like I said, the courts haven't been going along with it, but who knows? For years and years, you know, National Right to Life and others were saying this is going to allow abortion. You know, they're going to say an equal right. The Equal Rights Amendment says you can't discriminate against women on the basis of their gender, their sex. So since women are, well, that's an interesting point. Since women are the only ones who can get pregnant, you're discriminating. Except now they're saying that men can get pregnant. So I'm not quite sure how that argument is gonna work out. But we were saying for years that, you know, this is going to affect abortion. And the other side kept saying, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. This has nothing to do with abortion. And even as recently as 2020, Nancy Pelosi was saying that the ERA has nothing to do with abortion. Well, now in the last year or two, they have just given it up. Everybody is saying that they have to pass the ERA in order to protect the right to abortion. So just kind of be aware that that is out there, that is floating. I don't know if anybody in the administration is going to do anything. So far, the Department of Justice is holding firm that the 38 states, you know, there are not 38 states who have ratified it within that 7-year deadline, but that's something that, you know, may still be an issue. They were really working on it last week to try to kind of jumpstart the whole campaign to recognize the ERA. And then some bills have been introduced in Congress dealing with abortion pill reversal, requiring the woman to have an in-person visit with the doctor / abortionist. These are different things that the Food and Drug Administration has really relaxed their standards. But I don't expect anything to really happen, at least this year in Congress with that. Several states are looking at abortion pill reversal, requiring, like I said, the in-person visit, in their state legislature. So that's something that might be popping up in some of your states. But it's just, there's a lot that we can be working on. Several states are looking at Texas-style legislation. It's quite amazing that law has been in effect since September 1st. I think there were like 2 days where a federal court had, enjoined the law, but he was overturned or overruled by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I keep thinking, I never would have dreamed that that law in Texas would be in effect for this long. I was just assuming that some judge would strike it down. But the federal courts have been, at first, I think they were just a little confused, and now they're probably just waiting to see, what happens. And what's happening is that we see life goes on. Most babies in Texas are being saved. Certainly some of the women are going out of state, but there are many who are just, they can't get the abortion, so they're having the baby. And Texas has put together a fantastic plan for a woman who maybe doesn't have the resources or the local support to have the baby. So they've got, working with, they've got grants for pregnancy centers. They have a state health program that if you have a baby, a nurse will come into your home for the first 2 years of your baby's life to just kind of do the physical checkups and make sure that everything is okay, answer any questions that you might have. That's voluntary. They're not going to force a nurse into your home, but you could say, yeah, I'd like someone to come and make sure that I'm doing things right. And they did put together a very comprehensive plan to help women through what might be a problem pregnancy. So that's also something that several of our states are looking at. What can we do? What kind of information is currently available? Where are the I don't want to say the loopholes, the traps, trap doors? What are we not doing that a pregnant woman would choose life for her baby if these services were provided? So it might actually be a good way of putting together some government programs with some community support, community organizations, to see what is available and help the women so that they don't think abortion is their only option. We also are seeing in some places bad legislation. Massachusetts comes to mind, where they are looking at a bill that would require all their colleges and universities, health centers to provide the abortion pill to their students, requiring that it be available and provided free of charge. So we certainly have some challenges as well on the other end still, where we've got some states that it's going to take a long time, even if Roe is overturned, before we can get pro-life legislation through there. Just quickly, ballot measures. Pastor Duncan mentioned Kansas will be amending their constitution to say that abortion is not in the Constitution and tax funding is not in the Constitution, and that our laws on abortion will be made by state representatives or our elected officials in the state legislature. And they have to do that because the state Supreme Court determined that the Constitution somewhere, drafted 150 years ago is going to require abortion. In Michigan, we are seeing an effort to repeal a 1931 law that was against abortion. It protected unborn babies. And the abortion concern is that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that 1931 law protecting unborn children would go back into effect. So there is an effort underway right now to get enough petition signatures to get a measure on the ballot so that the people can vote to get rid of this 1931 law. Vermont has an effort this fall. I think it's going to be on Thursday that their state house is going to be voting and will likely pass, so that there will be an amendment, a constitutional amendment on their ballot this fall to amend the Constitution to make sure that abortion is a guaranteed right. So, you know, there's a lot of different battles going on this year in the legislature. Some states are going to pass some good pro-life legislation. Others are going to pass bad pro-abortion legislation. I've got a couple samples, and I'm going to, let's see, first, Pastor Jeff, if you would put up the bulletin insert. I think I just labeled it number 1. This is something on the Hyde Amendment in Congress, and it's very wordy, but sometimes people would like, you know, that information.
Sorry, wrong one.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay.
While I'm looking for this, as we talk about this, tell me, is this a good opportunity for all of our life teams and chapters by state to put information out to all of their membership about what legislation is coming forward, or is that's one of the things that you're saying is possible, correct?
The Hyde Amendment is something that, well,
I'm not just
Cap
specifically the
gets a large
Hyde
credit for keeping the appropriations bills from passing. The Senate just said, as long as the Hyde Amendment is not in there, we're not going to, you know, the Republicans, pro-life Republicans, as long as the Hyde Amendment is not in the appropriations bills, we're not going to pass them. You know, there are other objections to what's in the bill, you know, that many of them would have, but they were all pretty firm that, you know, they were not going to pass any appropriations bill that doesn't have Hyde. But I think that is something, and actually the one that, let's see,
I'm trying to get it. I'm sorry. I'm having a problem getting it to come up properly.
Okay, well, it's
there we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's just a sample of what you could do. Like I said, it's very simple, but it's very wordy, but it's urgent action needed. The Hyde Amendment, and it explains what it is and gives some background. And then down at the bottom, it says, please contact our senators and representative, urge them to oppose any appropriations bill, you know, that doesn't include the Hyde Amendment or these, you know, these limits. And then down at the bottom, I've got where you could put in the name and phone number of your US senators. And this is going to be something where, you know, if your church or your chapter is in one congressional district, then you could put the name and phone number of the representative. Some of you might actually cover, you know, 2, maybe even 3 congressional districts that you're kind of at a corner and you've got a little piece of each of them. I would put that contact information in there. It's, you know, cut it in half. You got 2 pieces right there. So you only have to make half the copies you would need for a church bulletin insert, or hand it out to people as they are leaving church. This is something that you could do definitely in the next week or 2. They're going to be voting on prior to February 18th on whether or not there's another continuing resolution. And it would be great if they were hearing from the people in their state, I guess or Senate, or House. I mean, it'd be great if they're hearing from the people. Pro-life members of Congress need to hear from us as support, reinforcement. You know, our opponents, those on the other side who think it's okay to kill babies, do not sit back and say, well, Senator Smith is always going to vote against us, so there's no point in wasting your time. You know, don't bother calling him. I mean, they are not saying that. They are saying so-and-so is, you know, voting to, you know, stop abortion, and we have to make sure he knows how upset we are. And they are bombarding pro-life senators with, you know, emails, phone calls, you know, why are you doing this? You know, so we need to be there as well, giving them the support and the encouragement to keep voting for the right thing, voting for the babies. And then flip it around. We might, you know, I sometimes have the tendency myself, well, Senator whoever is not going to vote with us, so why waste your time? They need to be hearing from us, because if they are only hearing from their allies, they just really think that we don't exist, or that we are such a minority, such a fringe element in society that we're not important. Both sides need to hear from us. So it doesn't matter if your senators are strongly hardcore pro-life or strongly hardcore pro-abortion. I would put their names and phone numbers on this and ask people to contact them. And this is something you can just take this exactly the way you want, or you can take out half of it because you think there's too many words and the people aren't going to read it. But I would, encourage you to just do something like this in the next week or two. Again, I encourage you to talk to the pastor, or whether it's your deacons, council president, someone, make sure that, they are okay with this. And if they just like, oh, I don't know if, I would push for something like this. This is legislation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with either Lutherans for Life or even a church putting something like this out. This is issue advocacy. We're trying to get a piece of legislation passed. If you run into a brick wall and they just don't want to get involved, as a church body, or even, supporting this in any way, then change the bottom where it says, please contact our senators and representative. You could remove the line that says urge them to oppose any annual appropriations bill. You could take that sentence out and just say, please contact your senators and representatives. If people are reading this, hopefully they understand what the message should be. So you can neutralize it a little bit if that's going to make it easier to actually get it, published or made available in your church. Certainly, I would hope. Pardon?
In terms of this particular handout, Carol, I would say maybe the paragraph where it says Democrats in the U.S. House remove the Hyde Amendment might be more something to take out, because there are going to be Democrats within your congregation who may object to seeing that.
You could do that. The U.S. House removed the limits. Yes, certainly you could do that. And this is in just a plain Word document, so you can take it, download it, and make any change you want.
So because this is advocacy or issue advocacy, it isn't inappropriate for us to go ahead and say, urge them to oppose this, tax funding of abortion, because that's what a Lutheran for Life would want to happen. So it's not inappropriate to be able to say that, as long as our pastors, as long as our organization that we're sharing this from is okay with sharing that as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can certainly encourage your people to vote, to contact their elected officials to vote for or against a particular piece of legislation. Okay. But yeah, it certainly is helpful if you can get, if the church leadership is in agreement with you. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I'm just going to put up one more, the next one, if you could, Pastor Jeff, the one that says Down syndrome. I've got it labeled, I think, as insert 2.
The computer is slowly sharing these, but not.
Okay, that's fine. I've got another one. It's just a little different. This is something, and I just rearranged, put it justified, center, so it might look a little strange. But it says help save babies with Down syndrome. And this is a bill that's actually in the Pennsylvania legislature. House Bill 1500 to protect, so that you can't get an abortion solely because you've been told the baby has Down syndrome. This is something that, we're just trying to make people aware that abortions can happen for any reason. And because you've got Down syndrome, that isn't a reason to kill the baby. But one thing I would recommend, if you do a brochure, tell them, if there is a specific bill number, make sure that is in there. A short description of the legislation, of what the bill would do, contact information, who they should contact or how to contact them. Now on this one, what I did down at the bottom is to find your senator, go to pasen.gov. If you go to that website, that's a very short thing. Someone can type that into their computer. What pops up is the Pennsylvania Senate page, and you can just, it'll say, find by address, find my senator and find by address. You type in your address and it's going to tell you who your senator is. So it's actually pretty easy, if you've got, you maybe have people in your church that are in a couple different state legislative districts. So some kind of information, just give people some direction as to how they can find who their representatives are, or provide the names and phone numbers for them. And I would always encourage you to put your name on the flyer, just so people know where it's coming from. There's no requirement that you do that. I think it's just nice that they know where they're getting the information from. Somehow that lends credibility to what you're saying. So again, this was just one more sample of what you could do. Let's see, I'm going to go to one more then. Actually, the next insert. Let's see, what did I call that one? I think I just said number 3. And I'm going to talk about a problem in my own church.
Is that it with the Albuquerque special
Yes.
election?
Yes. In 2013, there was a ballot measure in Albuquerque to protect unborn children who have developed to the point where they can feel pain. And the wording said, roughly 20 weeks. So my husband, who he's chairman of the Board of Deacons, I think he was then at that time as well, went to the deacons and said, hey, I think our church we need to tell our church members, make sure that they know this is on the ballot, which, they did, but explain it and encourage them to vote, for this ballot measure. And the pastor was fine. Deacons signed off on it, took it to church council, and ran into some, roadblocks. We had some church leaders who, just kind of like, oh, I don't know if we should be getting into this stuff. This is kind of political, and, abortion is controversial. Maybe we just shouldn't take a stand. Unfortunately, we had a few people, respected in the church who support abortion, and they just didn't want this out there. So instead of saying, vote yes on, this ballot measure, the deacons put together, and I'll give my husband credit. He was, I think, pretty much wrote this, and I'm not sure many changes were made, but went down explaining what the ballot was going to be. What do the Bible and the church say about abortion? Got a resolution from the synod talking about life, and then, said basically vote. And this turned out really well. It didn't say how to vote, but it said a vote for will do this, a vote against will do this. And most of the reaction from church members was very positive. But, I was disappointed that we couldn't tell them to vote yes. But this was the first step that we had getting into anything like that. So, and it was also, like I said, it was received very well in the church. But it was also a learning experience, that you can't just come in maybe with something that bold at first. The pastor, our first pastor was great. We've got a new young pastor who is talking about life frequently. It just kind of works its way into comments, into his sermons. And it's just, life created by God. God knew you from the beginning of, from your conception. All life is precious to God. He just finds a way to kind of work it in. So even the people that, maybe were kind of pro-abortion a few years ago, are at least kind of rethinking, and they have backed off. They're not saying anything, and they're accepting it. And I think just the mood has kind of changed that, you know what, our church is pro-life, and, you know, we're against abortion, and it just, there's a kind of a little bit of a mood shift, I think, and that it's just, you know, no, if someone in the church is pro-abortion, they are not speaking up and, you know, not popping their head up to say anything. So that's just, you know, one thing I think. Go
Thank
ahead.
you for sharing this. I think this is a great reminder that many of our life teams and chapters will face this kind of opposition from their local community, from their local parish level. But this is a great reminder of how you can approach these issues with gentleness and respect for the other side, and especially with the way you laid out the argumentation for the position, and then let it be a summary. Please vote with the complete summary of what happens when you vote for or against this, so that the conscience can be reminded how they are voting at the end, and the conscience itself will have to, you know, wrestle with that. So I think this is a great opportunity for others to see how you can overcome those few complaints that you will probably get, that we shouldn't be covering this within the church. And I think it's an important reminder that, no, this is exactly what the church covers.
Yep. Thank you. And then I've got in the Dropbox, there are 2 other pieces, and you don't have to pull them up, Pastor. But if people can look at them if they want to. The last couple of years, our church has, again, the deacons put together a bulletin insert for Sanctity of Life Sunday in January. And they didn't think, no offense, but they didn't think that most of the Lutheran material that they saw had enough information. So the deacons put together their own bulletin insert. And so there's 2 of them in there if you want to just look at them. But Bible quotes, synodical, you know, this, I'm a member of an LCMS church. So the synodical position on abortion, development of the unborn child. I mean, they're really trying to use this as an educational piece so that people who look at it are going to be reminded again and again that this is a human being special in God's eyes, created by God, and just kind of keeping the issue alive. So like I said, I just added a couple of the January inserts for information, but you know, take them and do with them what you want or don't want. Just a couple of quick things here. I've been talking, you know, you can get involved in some political activities. You can do certainly bulletin inserts or other information on legislation. But just a couple of other ideas or suggestions. Social media, of course, great way to spread the message to your friends, and hopefully they will spread it to theirs about legislation, lobbying, something that's going on. You can bring in a speaker, as we talked about a little earlier, but don't suggest that the people listening vote for a particular speaker. You know, try to keep it neutral. The speaker is there to talk about life issues or legislation. And they can certainly do that, and you can host that event and invite, you know, maybe a couple of their churches to come, depending on who it is. Now, I would think, I think it was Pastor, if you were bringing in Governor Youngkin, you'd probably have several churches that would, you know, love to have their members participate and just come and listen to them. That you can certainly do that. As an individual, you know, letter to the editor, or in the comment section, if it's a digital news article, you can say whatever you want about candidates and how great they are, how they're pro-life, and how we, you know, all pro-lifers need to be supporting them. As an individual, you can certainly do that and promote the candidates as much as you want. Let's see. Yes.
Has anyone else experienced that Facebook has been trying to change some of the pro-life messages that they might use on their page and so forth? There's been some statements about that, and I just experienced some of that myself. I won't go into it right now, but
They
anyway,
have,
there
they
is-
have censored some posts, censored some videos.
mhm,
So yeah, I mean, we're running against a tech giant
Yep.
all the way around, and they may try to shut us down. But I would, still try to post it and see if, maybe some people will see it before it gets pulled off.
mhm.
I would just
One could
keep
go to other
trying.
sources, but if you've established a series of contacts for years, it's what we've used, we older people have been using, and it's just,
Yep.
it's kind of sad. Thank you.
Yep. If you're in Kansas or Michigan, you may have something on the Kansas. You do have something on the ballot. Michigan, you might this fall. You can get involved in encouraging people to vote for or against those ballot measures. I don't know if there's anybody on who is up in the New England area, but if you could help out Vermont, help them to defeat. I would say as individuals, if you can, if you're in Massachusetts or Connecticut, get a carload of people and, I guess make the connection to someone in the state first. But, if you can help out in Vermont in that area, to defeat their constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights, that would be, a great project to do, maybe as individuals, like I said, just find some volunteers to help. Voter guides, you can certainly do those, make them neutral, get information out to people before the election, encourage your people to vote. There are just a lot of different things you can do either as individuals or as a group. And at this time, I think I have some things I want to say. So I'm going to ask Pastor if this would be the time. Turn off the camera.
Okay, I'm going to just allow everybody to say thank you for coming, and I hope that you'll come back again on February 15th. We will have Loretta Kelly on for a remembrance garden for the unborn. Please stay on. We will continue this conversation, but I am going to end this session for our recorded session. God bless you all.